All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dunk on AP podcast. Today we are talking topics 6.3 and 6.4 for AP World. We're talking Indigenous responses to state expansion and global economic development. So, without further ado, let's go dunk on AP. So, remember that in the last lesson, we were talking about why did countries do things imperially? Why did the major European powers plus Japan have imperial tendencies? But at the same time, what were their rationales? How did they justify it in their own heads? Today, we're going to be talking about reasons for resistance against colonial and imperial rule. So, a couple of things we're going to discuss: nationalism and identity, economic exploitation, cultural and religious suppression, political domination, social injustices, military oppression and brutality, land dispossession, and educated elites and political awareness. So let's go ahead and get started. First off, we're going to talk about Samore Ture and the Wasulu Empire. He is the founder of the Wasulu Empire. It existed from 1878 to 1898. This was an Islamic empire. It was Sunni. Touré's imperial conquests were characterized by violent conflict, seizure of territory, imposition of foreign religion in government, and enslavement. So the French actually clash with Touré in the 1880s and 1890s during the scramble for Africa. Gustave Bordes Desbordes, and I am so sorry for butchering that guy's name, led French invasions into Samare Touré's Wasulu Empire region. This was from 1881 to 1885, and it saw a series of conflicts between Bornese Desbordes and Touré with no decisive winner. Now, and here's where I remind you that just because Touré was not a European power doesn't mean that he was not imperial himself. So while the French were attacking Touré's territory, Samari Touré was also engaging in raids and his own imperialistic behavior in the region. The Tata of Sikasso was a defensive structure built in southern Mali to defend against the raids of Samari Touré, who was known to go and invade people in that area. So in 1885, you see a request from Samari Touré to be a British protectorate, which was denied. 1881 to 1889, he fights against French imperial efforts, and then 1878 to 1897, the Samorian Wars actually expanded his empire. So local kingdoms sought French rule to stop Samari Touré. So again, they actually so some people actually wanted this guy to stop expanding. So they actually wanted the French there. So the Wasulu Empire is going to end eventually with the defeat from the French, and there are still people, and that ends in 1898. There are still people who question, was he a hero or was he a tyrant? Some people viewed him as a symbol of resistance against the French. Now, moving back to the Indian Rebellion of 1857, remember, we've talked about this a good bit, so I'll only cover it briefly. The British East India Company had 50,000 British soldiers on the Indian continent and 300,000 Indian soldiers known as sepoys. The mutiny erupted because of the new Enfield rifle cartridges that were possibly greased. We're not quite sure if it's true or not, with cow and pig fat. The rebellion spread quickly. Delhi was seized, and Mughal Empire Bahadur Shah II was named the sovereign ruler of India. And the rebellion spread from there. The way that the British responded to this, though, they were initially caught off guard, and the rebellion was pretty effective. But they called in reinforcements from Britain and other colonies. They recaptured Delhi and other key locations in late 1857, and the rebellion was fully suppressed by mid 1858. So remember, there was economic exploitation happening by the East India Company, disrupting traditional Indian industries, imposing heavy taxation and unpopular land revenue policies on the Indian people. There are also military grievances among the sepoys. They were poorly paid and they had limited opportunities for promotion, and forced overseas service went against their religious beliefs, actually. Then the religious and cultural interference that happened as well. Fears of forced conversions to Christianity by British missionaries. Social reforms such as the outlawing of sati were viewed as a direct attack on Indian religious and cultural norms. And then the introduction of the Enfield rifle. The cartridges for this rifle were believed, possibly, to be greased with cow and pig fat. And the requirement to bite the cartridge to use it, it was seen as an assault on their religious sensibilities. And the key concept here is that increasing discontent with imperial rule led to rebellions, not just in India, but everywhere, some of which were influenced by religious ideas. So There's also Tupac Amaro II in Peru, who was rebelling against the Spanish. This was in 1780 to 1782. This was an indigenous uprising against Spanish colonial rule in Peru, and of course led by Tupac Amaru II. Forced There was bad working conditions with forced labor in the silver mines. There was heavy taxation of the Peruvian people. There was systemic discrimination and resistance. Also, they were influenced by Enlightenment ideals to have their resistance. Now, this led to a number of executions. The Spanish will eventually capture one of Tupac's officials and execute him, and then and really that will eventually in 1781 you'll have the execution of Tupac and his family. They're executed publicly. They're beheaded. So then you got the ghost dance of 1890. In 1889, there is a spiritual leader named Wavoka of a native tribe who has a vision, or believes that he has a vision, which forms the basis of the ghost dance movement. This involved the resurrection of the dead of this tribe. It was meant to stop westward expansion and restore native lands. The ghost dance very quickly spread among various Native American tribes and was a peaceful movement, but the U.S. government viewed it as a militant rebellion. And remember, this was all part of the U.S.'s policy of manifest destiny, moving westward, and that it was their God-given right to do so, right? And that America would have everything from the east to the west. So moving forward a little bit, just a couple of other resistance movements and rebellions. War of the Golden Stool. This took place in the Ashanti Empire in present-day Ghana, West Africa, against British rule. And then you got the Xhosa cattle killing movement. This took place in the Eastern Cape in present-day South Africa as response to the British colonial expansion and pressures. And then you had the Mahdist movement, which took place in Sudan, and was primarily a religious and political uprising against the Turco-Egyptian rule of Sudan. So you also had Balkan nationalism and new states rising up. There were strong nationalist movements developed among various ethnic groups in the Balkans. Balkans are, of course, in lower Eastern Europe. Independence for various new states such as Greece, Serbia, and Bulgaria occurred in the 1800s. You also, at this time, had the formation of the Cherokee Nation, and that was in America, obviously. A written form of the Cherokee language was developed, and the Cherokee Nation was formed in the early 1800s. The first Cherokee Constitution was adopted in 1827, and they were forced to relocate from Georgia to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears. They adopted a new constitution in 1839. The Cherokee Nation is one of the biggest and most influential Native American tribes in the United States today. So all of these were just the different ways that the colonized, or the people who were suffering from or experiencing imperialism, these are the different ways that they rebelled against it, or how they responded to it. So a little bit of talk about global economic development. First off, I want to talk about economic imperialism. This was a form of imperialism where a dominant country or entity exerts control or influence over the economy of a less powerful country without the need for political or military control, which is often achieved through monopolistic trade practices, investment, or lending, leading to economic dependency. Also, export economies. Those are economies in which the production and export of a limited range of commodities, such as raw materials or agricultural products, dominate the economy. These goods are often exported to a dominant country, which then processes them into manufactured goods. So, of course, just the main thing that you need to know is industrialism and imperialism are sort of a self-sustaining thing. They really are a circle. So industrialism leads to urbanization and population growth. This increases the populations that leads to an increased demand for consumer goods and food. Raw materials for consumer goods and agricultural products for food had to be sourced from outside the home country. This led to economic imperialism and the creation of export economies. So with Britain and Argentina shifted from Spanish control to British economic influence. And Britain wanted Buenos Aires for trade and resources in 1806 to 1807. British invasions fueled Argentinian nationalism, and push for independence. Argentina's independence in 1816 led to British economic interactions, and then Britain targeted Argentina for its agricultural resources after their independence. Argentina was a top recipient of British investment by 1900. Britain developed Argentina's railroads, because remember, there were plus sides to imperialism in the sense that you did kind of get brought into the 19th and 20th centuries, and that was one of the ways that these imperial countries rationalized the fact that they were imperial. We're bringing these. Remember, we're sort of bringing them into civilization, right? It's a great endeavor that we're making by doing that. That was what they thought. Railways built for Argentina's exports were built for Argentina's exports, not for passenger travel, though. And Argentina exported meat and grain and imported British goods. Argentine cattle were introduced by the British in 1536. They flourish on the Pampas Plains, and then refrigerated ships in the 1870s allow the export of beef. And Britain's growing population demands beef in the late 19th century. Argentina became a leading producer of meat for export. And really, Britain's formal empire, of course, you probably think of as the Caribbean and India and places like that. But their informal empire was beef from Argentina, cotton from Egypt, tea from China, and that's, like I said, it's their informal product. And remember that Britain banned cotton textiles from India in 1721, so they wouldn't compete with its own textile industry. This significantly depressed India's cotton production. 80% of Britain's cotton imports came from the United States, but the American Civil War's port blockades cut off the supply of cotton. The price of cotton soared by 150%. Muhammad Ali of Egypt had already embraced cotton as a cash crop, so he ramped up production and filled the need for cotton in Britain. And cotton made up 93% of Egypt's exports by the end of the 19th century. Egypt becomes a big cotton exporter. Then you've got palm oil in West Africa. Palm oil was in demand in Britain for use as machinery lubricant, the production of soap and candles, and for baking. Extracting the oil is a labor-intensive process, though, which of course means that you're going to need slaves to do that. It was a central component of the West African economy as more land was dedicated to cultivation. Export economies, you have Britain, Europe, and the United States needing more raw materials to fuel industrialization. So, of course, they need colonies in order to do that. So you see how industrialization leads to imperialism, leads to colonies, leads to imperial colonies. So this is how this is how the economy worked, and it's how the different groups responded to imperialism in this time period that we're talking about from 1750 to 1900.